I found a hidden door in my basement. I found the door by accident. It was hidden behind the water heater, covered by two old shelves stacked with paint cans. I only noticed it because I dropped a screw and watched it roll toward a seam that shouldn't have been there. I should have left it alone. I didn't. I moved the shelves. A narrow frame sat in the concrete. There was a latch the color of old coins. I pulled. The door opened with a soft scrape and a breath of stale air from a space that felt closed for years. Behind it was another basement. My basement. The same beams with the same pencil marks from when I measured a table. The same plastic bin missing two wheels. I stood there and saw my life carpet a few feet away. I called out, "Hello." I don't know why. Habit, I think. A voice answered from upstairs, my voice. Then I heard steps. My throat tight. He rounded the corner. We stared. He looked like me. Exact enough that for a second I thought I was watching a video. Same hairline. Same scar on the knuckle from opening a can wrong once. Same small stain on the shirt you keep for chores. We both put our hands up like we were calming a mirror. "Don't run," he said. I wasn't going to. This felt like a lucid dream. We didn't rush. We didn't fight. We spoke like we were both afraid to scare the air. He asked if I lived here. I said yes. He nodded and said, "Me too." It was simple and impossible. He glanced around my basement like someone checking a hotel room for damage. He knew where to look. He pointed at the leak I'd patched last winter and asked if it held. I said yes. He nodded like he already knew the answer. There were some differences, though. He told me his wife had died 5 years ago soon after the wedding. He said it in a flat voice that didn't invite questions. I looked at his left hand, the ring. Same as mine, except mine had a nick. His didn't. We talked for hours. I told him about my son and showed him a picture. We agreed to leave the door alone for now. We shook hands. His palms were dry. Mine were not. I went upstairs and told myself I would never open it again. I opened it the next day. He had left a note on the concrete on his side. It was my handwriting, but neater. It said, "We can help each other, small things, win-win." I laughed because I had used that phrase at work that week and hated myself for it later. I slid the note back and wrote, "Like what?" He answered with a recipe for bread that didn't collapse. I used it. My son ate 2 slices and asked for more. I told myself it was fine to accept a small gift from myself. He repaired the freezer handle I had meant to fix for months. He passed over a better caulk for the corner leak. He sent me a list of questions to ask my insurance so I'd stop getting overcharged. He never asked for anything larger than a measurement or a photo in return. I started to look for his notes in the morning. I felt like a man with a neighbor who actually knew things. We set a time, once a week, 10 minutes. In the basement, halfway through the door with our feet on our own concrete. We talked like coworkers outside a meeting room. We kept it light. He told me about a neighbor's dog that barked at a squirrel every day at noon. I told him about my boss who liked to say, circling back as if it was a solution. He laughed in the same short way I did, one breath, then done. Trust grew the way vines grow on a fence, a little at a time, then all at once. My proposal at work landed better than anything I'd written in a year after he highlighted 3 lines and wrote, "Move this up." He liked the look on my face when small problems vanished. He knew my house. He moved through it like me. He skipped the 3rd stair even when his hands were full and didn't check his feet. He flipped the light in a room without reaching. He picked up the drill and spun the chuck the way I always did with my thumb. I told myself it made sense. If his house matched mine, he had the same habits. I ignored the itch that said his habits fit my house too easily. After a month, he asked to talk. He had an idea, he said, that could help both of us. We chose a night when my wife would be out with our son at her sister's. At 7, I went through to his side. He opened his side door and led me up to his kitchen. We talked for a while. He asked about my son. I felt grateful and then guilty for feeling grateful. We ate pasta. We talked about money. We talked about the car that needed brakes. We talked about a small leak in the roof that never got worse and never got better. He poured water and asked how my wife was doing since the loss last year. He didn't say the word. He didn't need to. My fork stopped and drew a small scratch on the plate. I watched his face like it would give me a reason to let this pass. His wife had died 5 years ago. That was his story. He hadn't lived what we lived last year. Only my wife and I knew about the miscarriage. We didn't say it out loud to anyone else. We barely said it to each other. He had no right to hold that word in his mouth for me. He had no way to know it unless he had stood in rooms he had no right to stand in. I looked at the counter. A toolbox sat there. His, same brand as mine, same stickers in the same places, but the tray had a crack mine didn't. Inside, the tape measure had a little marker line with my son's height from last spring. I had made that line. I had put the tape measure away in my drawer, everything tightened. He hadn't guessed anything. He had watched. He had been here when I was. He had moved through this space, quiet and exact, and lifted our private life like a lid to look inside. He watched me understand. He didn't look guilty. He looked relieved, like we had reached the real topic at last. He said he liked my son. He said it in a tone I would use for a neighbor's garden. Neutral, pleasing, planned. I told him I'm going to leave. I tried to sound calm. He tilted his head and asked me not to be dramatic. The word felt like a hand on my mouth. He was ready. He moved faster than I expected. He grabbed my wrist and twisted it behind my back. I fell hard. The chair scraped. He was on me. He wrapped a belt around my forearms and cinched it until my hands went numb. He bound my ankles. He spoke softly, telling me to breathe, telling me not to make it worse, telling me it would be okay if I listened. He kept me from hitting my head on the tile. He adjusted the knot like he cared. That made me hate him more. He told me he didn't want to hurt me. He told me he had a plan. He told me he had thought about this for months and didn't want it to be ugly. He told me I could help him make it clean. He leaned close. He told me his story. He said his wife was killed by a drunk driver. He said he used to sit alone in his basement until 3 in the morning looking at the wall with a silence that made him think he was going to break in half. He said he looked at the wall and wished it would open and swallow him. He said it opened one day, a year before I ever found mine. He watched us for a long time, he said, through that year. He learned our days. He learned our jokes. He learned our pain. He gave me small gifts so I would open doors for him, one at a time. He believed he was owed this life, my life. He had convinced himself that he was correcting a mistake made by the universe. I told him he was sick. I told him my wife would know. I told him my son would know. He smiled in a sad, patient way, like I was a child who didn't understand how houses are built. He pulled me to my feet and guided me to his basement. He led me down and sat me on the concrete near the workbench and checked the knots again the way you check a seatbelt. "We'll go downstairs," he said. "I want to show you something. You'll see it lines up." He loosened the belt around my ankles so I could walk. He kept the one on my wrists tight. He took my elbow. We stepped toward the door. The frame waited, dark and quiet. I knew he was going to kill me in the basement. I had to escape. I let my weight slide to the side and threw myself into him. We hit the bench. A drawer jumped and something fell. We crashed to the floor. He grabbed my shirt and I kicked with both legs, a single hinge of panic. His hand found my throat and released when he had to catch his balance. My fingers closed around a screwdriver. I swung. The impact stunned both of us. He made a small noise. He touched his abdomen like he had spilled coffee. His eyes went wide and then narrow like he was trying to solve a math problem he had thought was easy. I hadn't aimed the screwdriver. I had driven it into him without thinking. I didn't look at the wound. He slid down and rested against the bench. He didn't say anything for a moment. He took a breath and said, "You have to go." He wasn't begging. He wasn't threatening. He sounded like a man who had missed an exit. I told him I would get help. He shook his head. He said, "Close it." I struggled with the belt. I rubbed it against the corner of the workbench until skin burned and fabric frayed. It loosened enough for one hand to slip free. I pulled my other hand out and almost passed out from relief. I went to him. I told him I was sorry. He nodded once, not like forgiveness, but like a man who has decided something for himself. I stepped through to my side and shut the door. I dragged the shelves back. I pushed the old drywall over the frame and drove screws into studs. The drill shook in my hands. I didn't stop. I brought boards and fixed them in an X and then in another. I stacked bins in front. I moved the freezer 2 inches so it sat tight to the wall. I locked the basement door at the top of the stairs and wrote the code on a sticky note and stuck it to the jamb so I wouldn't give myself an excuse to forget. I cleaned the screwdriver and put it away. I put the belts in the closet. I washed my hands and stared at the sink until the water ran cool again. When my wife came home with our son, I told her I fell asleep at the table. It wasn't a lie. A part of me had lain there and not moved for a long time. That week I went downstairs every morning before work and checked the boards. The screws held. The drywall held. The bins sat heavy. The wall stayed a wall. I put a chair at the foot of the stairs and sat for 10 minutes and listened. I heard the house settle and the faint hum of the freezer. Once I thought I heard a small noise and then realized it was my phone vibrating upstairs. I told myself I had done what a father does. I had protected my family. I told myself the man had told me to close it. I told myself he had made me choose. I told myself a dozen versions until one felt enough like the truth to stand on. I didn't tell my wife. I tried. I stood behind her while she washed dishes and opened my mouth. Nothing came out that wasn't going to break us. I pictured her face while I talked about a man with my face and a door in our basement and a plan to replace me. I pictured her looking at me afterward when the house was quiet. I pictured her flinching at a sound in the night and not knowing if it was the house or me. I chose to keep that from us. We lived. Time did what it does. Spring turned to summer. Our son learned to ride a bike in our yard. He fell and laughed and cried at the same time, and I held him and told him he was brave. My wife stood on the grass and clapped. For a few weeks I believed the boards were only boards. We had another child, a girl, small and loud and perfect. Our son turned 5. He asked bigger questions. He moved faster. He talked like a little detective. He liked to help me bring laundry down and then abandon it to run cars on the concrete. He liked to push the dryer button and shout that he was strong. We let him be proud. On a Saturday, my wife took our daughter to a friend's house. I stayed home with him. We made pancakes and built a fort out of chairs and a blanket and knocked it down on purpose so we could shout. He asked if he could get his pirate sword from the basement. I said yes without thinking. He ran. I followed out of habit. He dug in the costume bin and popped up with the plastic sword and grinned. He looked past me. His grin faded. He lowered the sword. He stared at the wall behind the water heater like he was reading a word there. He pointed. "Dad," he said. My other dad in there told me to keep the basement unlocked. My skin went cold without the air being cold. I told him basements play tricks and sent him upstairs with his sword. I stayed. I didn't put my ear to the wall. I didn't touch a screw. I watched the seam where drywall met studs until the house's slow breath felt like mine again. That night the house would not settle. The darker rectangle of the basement door lay inside the dark like a mouth held shut. Pipes clicked. Somewhere a latch thought about moving. At 2, I checked the lock. At 3, I checked it again. It held. The metal was cool and patient. Around 4, I woke to the softest sound, a shape of sound, 2 pieces of air parting, not the latch turning, not yet. A whisper of a thought deciding. I lay there and counted my wife's breaths and waited for it to choose. I keep the door locked and I listen for the latch to turn.
Survived this nightmare? Watch the next horror here. Hit the subscribe button for more stories.